Good morning. Glad to have you guys here this morning. Glad you're with us. Those of you who are watching online or will be watching, we're happy that you're here. Do we have any guests who are with us for the first time this morning? Can you be with us for the first time? No one's going to own up? We have had guests who have not wanted to own up, so I have to check out there. So you know most of the drills here, but I wanted to show you something on the bottom of your notes. If you flip your notes over to the back and to the very bottom there, you'll see we have a few announcements coming up. One of them, which isn't on there, but it's like a bonus announcement, but the C2C is starting back up, so our children's church is going to start back up in 2 weeks. I believe that's on the 7th, on March 7th during second service, so this service for 5 through 12-year-olds. And then also you'll see there we have the VOM Advanced Conference coming up. So usually we go up to LA and we go and take part in that. But this year it's going to be virtual. And so we're going to gather here and watch it virtually. You can also, if you can't come, you can watch it virtually and not be with us as we watch it virtually. You can get the link for that as well. So if you want to do that, let me know. Then the last thing you'll see there is that blood drive that's coming up. And you can scan that QR code on the bottom, and it'll link you right to the sign-ups that they have for that. So you have to actually schedule a time to sign up. And so you can do that as well, if you'd like. Now, for the last few weeks, and it's actually been maybe more like the last 2 months, we've been studying Jesus as he has been at the Feast of Booths in Jerusalem. And we've been in John chapter 7 and John chapter 8. And it's been pretty intense. Intense because Jesus has been standing in front of these crowds and in front of the religious leaders. And they have been verbally sparring over his claims to be Messiah. And so there's been this back and forth with them. And it's been pretty intense. And his words, though, have been straight and they have been clear. He's been teaching that he is Messiah. He said it over and over again, that his message is true, his message comes from God. And not only that, but he's been saying that whoever follows him will be free, and then those who follow him will not walk in darkness, but those who follow him will be able to walk in light. In other words, those who follow Jesus, and he said this over and over again, will be able to spiritually see. Now, this has been Jesus' message from the beginning. This has been what he's been proclaiming, that he's been asking people and proving to them that they should be believing in him and in his words and in the things that he's saying. But at every corner, every turn, it's also been rejected and countered by the religious leaders in every way. Every chance that they can get to attack and to go against Jesus, they have. Now, as we get to John chapter 9, Jesus is going to do something that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is exactly every single thing that he has claimed. He's going to perform a miracle that's so culturally stunning that it gives overwhelming credentials to his claim as the Messiah. And so if chapters 7 and 8, Jesus set Jerusalem on fire with his words. In chapter 9, he's going to do the same, but with his actions. And not even that, there's even more there, that Jesus is not just going to perform a miracle or do something that just sets Jerusalem on fire, but he's going to do it in a way that discredits and disproves the religious leaders. He's going to do something that's going to say, listen to me, not to them. And he does it in chapter 9, and he does it where he's actually not even the main character. If you look in chapter 7 and 8, you're going to see a bunch of red, if you have red letter Bibles, Jesus talking. In chapter 9, Jesus talks in the beginning and at the end. And he's not even there in the middle. But his point is this. His point is simple. He's Messiah and should be listened to. The religious leaders and the Pharisees, they don't speak for God. And they should not be followed, and they should not be listened to. Let's read in chapter 9. So if you want to turn your Bibles to John chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 1. which is a good place to start. John chapter 9, verse 1. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, I don't know about you, but this story starts pretty strange. Right? The disciples, they asked Jesus this strange question. They're walking through Jerusalem somewhere. It doesn't really give us the context as far as where they're exactly walking, but around the time of the Feast of Booths. And as they're walking, they see this man who's born blind. And how they know he was born blind, we're not quite sure. Maybe he told them, maybe they just knew, maybe they recognized this man from somewhere. But they know he's born blind, and it's that fact that he's born blind, and John's going to repeat it 4 to 5 times in here. But that fact that he's born blind causes them to turn to Jesus and ask this question, which seems strange to us. Did this man or did his parents sin? Right? They're just presuming the fact someone sinned. This man was born blind for a reason, because someone sinned. Either was it this man or was it his parents? And it's kind of an offensive question, it would be to us. But actually, it just reflects a common held teaching of the time. It reflects this belief that they had. You see, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law for years and years and years have taught that someone born blind, so the specific sin or the specific birth defect of being born blind was caused and was the result of divine judgment. Okay, so that's this presupposition that if you were born blind, it was because either you or your parents had sinned so grossly that it caused God to stop and to curse you with blindness. So someone who was born blind, so they were blind from birth. And you could understand maybe some of the, like maybe a parent did something so egregious that, the sins of the fathers went down, okay. But then they also thought it could be the infant. So in the womb, this baby, they taught this, could have sinned, kicked the mom in the wrong way, right? Mothers, that never happens, I know. But kicked the mom in the wrong way, looked at them if they looked at that point, did something that God would curse them in this way. Or the thought was that baby, sometime in their life, they were going to do something so gross, so egregious, and God knew about it, and so he caused them to be blind from birth. Now you can imagine just the humanity of that. I think about the shame on a family, right? The birth of this baby, where it's supposed to be this happy time, and yet as it comes out of the womb blind, everybody looks at the parents, what did you do? With this baby, what did they do? That they would look at them, and you can imagine the shame that comes out with it, that God's punishing them for something. And they wore this shame their whole life. You can imagine it resting on their family. Sideways glances, whispers, "What did you do?" Parents would say, it wasn't me. And everybody would, sure it wasn't. Or was it your kid? Or waiting for that kid to grow up and do something so horrible that it would warrant this type of sin or this type of punishment. So they were outcast. They were regulated to begging. They were cast out from society. Those born blind were actually not even allowed to say the Shema. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a very integral part of these morning and evening ritual prayers where they would say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one." They weren't even allowed to claim God as theirs. So you can imagine just the heaviness, the outcast, the hopelessness that this would put on a family. And as far as healing goes, that was totally out of the question. Totally out of the question. Blindness sometimes was healed. There's documented evidence of people who weren't born blind. They just became blind from, a virus or something, and they were able to be healed by a doctor or in some ceremony. But no one had ever been born blind and then healed. It was a pretty hopeless situation. There was no hope for someone born blind, except one thing. One small little piece of hope that they had. that was taught to them. As the rabbis, they saw something in the prophet Isaiah and his writings. 2 times in his writings, he makes these claims that when Messiah comes, when he speaks about the time that Messiah would return or would be on the earth, he talks about the blind receiving their sight. Isaiah 35, and it's on the screen here, 35:5, speaking of the time of the Messiah. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. And then again, Isaiah speaks in Isaiah 61, verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prisons to those who are bound. And that last line in the Septuagint, so the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, and then in some of the other texts, that last line is actually translated to give sight to the blind. And so the rabbis, they took this as a sign. When Messiah comes, you will know he's here because he will heal someone who is born blind. It would be like the movie The Sword and the Stone, right? When Arthur pulls the sword out of the rock, everyone knew what that meant. When he pulled the sword out, everyone knew this is the king. And so at this time, everyone knew Messiah, when he comes, he was going to heal someone who is born blind. And so if they saw that event, everyone would know Messiah is here. And so Jesus, after encountering this question from his disciples, he turns to his disciples and he corrects their thinking. Verse 3, Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. And then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And so he went and he washed and he came back seeing. So according to Jesus, who sinned? Who sinned that caused this guy to be born blind? Nobody. I just said it's not him, it's not his parents. This guy's actually here today because I'm going to heal him. I'm going to do a work that I was sent here to do. It's day. I'm here. The light of the world is here. It's day. There's going to be a time when the light of the world is gone, when it will be night, and there will be no more miracles proving Messiah. And so we work here during the day because it's the day. And so this man is here not because of his sin, but it's because I'm going to heal him. I'm going to do something. And so then, after saying that, Jesus does something strange. And to those of us who've grown up in the church and you've heard this story over and over again, like sometimes it's easy to kind of numb yourself to the weirdness of what Jesus just does. Like, what did he do? He spits on the ground. Right, don't lose the strangeness here. He spits on the ground. He makes mud. And then this guy didn't even ask. He puts it in this guy's eyes. He rubs it on his eyes. Or what in the world is Jesus doing? Has he ever healed anybody like this before? Have we ever, like the guy who's lame, does he just make a bunch of mud with spit and rub it on his? Never. Or what is Jesus doing? Why is he doing it in this way? Usually he just says, get up, come out. He's healed. He just talks and things happen. But here Jesus mixes mud with his spit mud, puts it in his eyes, sends him to a pool to wash his eyes. So Jesus isn't even there when he washes the mud out and the guy can see. So this is different. What is Jesus doing? We know part of what he's doing, right? That he has just healed someone born blind. Just proved he's Messiah. Right there. The word would have spread. Jerusalem would have caught on fire with just that fact alone. But with the mud and with the saliva and with the spit, Jesus didn't just prove to be Messiah, but he did it in a way that proved that the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the teachers of the law, that they were wrong. Did it in a way that proved that they were wrong. And their message, the oral law, was not from God. They were not mouthpiece of God. They were wrong. Because he breaks their oral tradition of the Sabbath in 3 different ways. And you remember all the teachings on the Sabbath. Now we have the Mosaic law, that they were to honor the Sabbath. They were to treat it as holy, as different, as set apart from any other day. That was God's command to the Israelites. But then there came along the different traditions of the oral law that added and heaped upon all these different rules and regulations on them about how they should worship at the Sabbath, how they should be set apart, what they could do, what they couldn't do, what they could eat, how far they could travel. There was just so nuanced to this point that they felt if you broke these oral laws, it was the same thing as breaking the Mosaic law, that you were sinning. And some of these laws were so crazy, like to the point of if there was a fire at your house on the Sabbath, don't even think about bringing stuff out. Let it burn. You would rather let the things, the materials, all the keepsakes from dishes, everything, you'd rather let it burn than pull it out. But you could bring some things out, but this is how you had to do it. You had to go inside. If you had clothes, you could put 2 articles of clothing on, run out, take 2 articles of clothing off, run back in, put 2 more on. But this is the extent that they would honor the Sabbath and follow the oral law. This is how nuanced it was. And so they didn't want to break it. And so Jesus, he breaks the oral law, the Sabbath, in these 3 different ways, for at least 3 ways. So the first one is he heals this man. He works, it is this work of healing on the Sabbath. Now, you could heal someone if it was a life-threatening injury. Like if they're about to die and you can perform some sort of a healing, or you could give them some medicine, you could do it. But this one, if you could wait until the next day, don't do it on the Sabbath. Wait. So in here, Jesus would have done it the next day, the day before, no problem. But he healed him on the Sabbath, broke the Sabbath in the oral law, in their mind. Second thing, he made mud. Tons of rules about not spitting on the Sabbath. Because when you spit on the Sabbath, you make a hole in the ground. What if a bird came over and dropped a seed in? And you kick the dirt over, you're practically a farmer. You're working on the Sabbath. And here Jesus is the farmer on the Sabbath, right? He's making mud. He's stirring it around. He's breaking the oral law. And then finally, the oral law was so specific to even say, if you were to heal someone who was born blind, okay, on any day, not born blind, but if you were to heal someone who was blind on any day, the way you weren't supposed to do it is by mixing mud and spittle to do it. So specifically, even this way. And so you see Jesus so evidently, on one hand, fulfills this Mosaic, this messianic expectation that had been taught to them by their teachers. All the while, sticking his finger in the oral law and the traditions of the elder, fulfilling one, yet so specifically breaking the other. To the point that it causes, and we're going to see the tension that this causes. Right? Both of them cannot be true. Both of them cannot be true. And so people are going to want to know which one it is. Let's continue reading in verse 8. Now the neighbors are beginning to find out. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some of them said, "It's he." While others said, "No, it's he, somebody like him." He kept saying, "I'm the man." And so they said to him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "This man called Jesus made mud, and he anointed my eyes, and he said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And so I went and washed and recovered my sight, received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I don't know." And so the first thing is this man goes and returns to his normal habits, that he goes back maybe to where he was a beggar, or he goes back to his house, and the neighbors and the people around who are in normal interaction with him, they don't even know who he is. And at first you think, what in the world? But it does make sense. Somebody who has been blind their whole life, has never seen, their skin, their face, never looked into a pool of water and been, I need to, my hair is really messed up. And you can imagine now all of a sudden he can see. He would carry himself differently. He would walk differently. No one would lead him. I'm sure his face was cleaner. I'm sure he stood straight up. His hair, maybe he got a haircut on the way in. So, man, this is what I've been looking like. But to the point where this man was so different that they didn't even recognize him. And you can see there's an argument and the division, which is usually what follows Jesus. There's this division. And the man's in the background, guys, it's me. It's me. It's me. And finally they believe him. And what is important about his story? What's important about his story? What does he retell? It was Jesus. I'm the one who was born blind. And then it was with the mud, right? The mud is a big deal to them. And then it was on the Sabbath. And he keeps retelling this story because that stirred their questions. And really what they were thinking was this: how could a sinner do something from God? Because in their minds, what did Jesus sin against? What did he sin against? What law did he sin against? Mosaic law? Oral law, right? And they held it on par with the Mosaic law at that point. And so they're going, something has to give. Either this didn't happen, or this Jesus is not a sinner. And so they had to find out what is going on. What is going on here? And so they do the only thing they know how to do. They go to their religious leaders. They go to their authorities and they bring this man. And the word here, and we're going to see it in the next just sentence, they bring this man, and the word brought that they use is the same term that was used when the woman who was caught in adultery, do you remember back in John 8? When she's brought, the Pharisees bring her to Jesus, right? They take her to Jesus. Like, come on, we're going to go talk to Jesus. And so these guys, they bring this man to the Pharisees, right? He didn't have a choice in this. He is going. Like, they have to find out what is going on. So let's pick up in verse 13. And they brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. And now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. And so the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. And some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. And so they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes? And he said, he's a prophet. And so again, you see the stories relayed. It's the Sabbath. He was born blind. There was mud. And they don't know what to do with this guy. You see, they're probably caught off guard. I'd imagine this happens pretty sequentially. Like they hadn't heard this before. All of a sudden, this man is right in front of them, doing a messianic miracle, but breaking their oral traditions, and they don't know what to do, so they turn to him. Well, who do you say he is? And the guy at this point, and you're going to see his development, but initially he doesn't quite know what to make of it either, and he says, he's a prophet. He's a prophet. And so the religious leaders are not going to just take this man's word, but they need more proof. So they bring in his parents. Verse 18, the Jews did not believe that he had been born blind, that he had been blind and had received his sight, until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight. And they asked them, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, we know this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we don't know. Nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He's of age, ask him." So what are his parents scared of? They're getting tossed out of the synagogue. And if you remember what the synagogue was, different from the temple, but the synagogue was like a town hall or a meeting place. And there would be a bunch of them throughout Jerusalem or any place where there's more than 10 Jewish males living. And these places were like a town hall, a place, add that with like a school where the children would be taught, places of business where men would talk together, places where they would read the scriptures together. So this is an important, integral part of Jewish society. And the religious leaders are threatening at this point anyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ, is the Messiah. They're done in the synagogue. And now there's 3 different ways even that they could be in trouble with the leaders of the synagogue or cast out of the synagogue. The first one was just like this oral reprimand. Okay, that's not what they're saying. The second way is you could get like a timeout from the synagogue, up to 30 days. You could be on timeout. You can't come back in here. And the third way is that you can be forever cast out of synagogue. Do not come back. I don't care what you do. And that's what they're threatening in this case. And so it causes his parents to say, "Hey, we know he was born blind. All right, this is our son. But we can't tell you how he was made. Well, we can't tell you who did it. You're going to have to ask him. He's of age. He can speak for himself." And so the religious leaders, they still not going to believe. And so in verse 24, they bring the man back in for part 2. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." So why do they call Jesus a sinner here? What did he do? Broke the oral law. Right? So they call him a sinner. Good news, he's a sinner. We figured it out. And he answered so this is the man, he answered, "Whether he's a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." And they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And it's so important to them, this how he did it. The mud is huge. The wind is huge. So they want to know, how did he did it? How did he do it? And he answered them, "I've told you already, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to be his disciples?" And they reviled him. They reviled him at that point. "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we don't know where he comes from." So what do they mean by this disciples of Moses? What came from Moses that they claimed? What did they claim came from Moses? Oral law. We're disciples of Moses. We don't even know where this guy came from. And the man answered, "Why is this an amazing thing?" I love that answer of him. Why is this even an amazing thing? Like who had taught him this very messianic prophecy? Who had taught him? Where did he get this from? Them. Right? They had taught this stuff. And now it's here and it's sitting right in front of him that he is that man. And he says, "Why is this even an amazing thing? This came from you. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to them. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." And they answered him, "You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us?" And they cast him out. So the religious leader is not going to take anything from this man. Right? They're shown exactly this messianic miracle, and instead of believing, what do? They revert right back. "You were born in utter sin. We know why you're born blind. You think we are going to listen to you?" And then they cast him out. I think it's so ironic. Poor guy. And he started the day cast out. In the middle of the day, somewhere he's not. And then in the end of the day, they cast him out again. And so the man leaves. And then Jesus finds him. Verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he answered, "Who, sir, is he that I may believe him?" And why doesn't this guy know who Jesus is? Why doesn't he know? He hasn't seen him yet. Right, you remember Jesus put mud on his eyes and then sent him away? And so this miracle actually happened away from Jesus. So this guy doesn't know who Jesus is. Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things, and they said to him, "Are we also blind?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." So what prompts Jesus to come back to the scene? I think this is, you see just the humanity of Jesus. How he just loves this man. He hears that he has been cast out, and so he comes back and he meets him. And then he introduces himself to him as the Messiah, and the man believes. Right? Cast out by humans, rejected by man, yet accepted by God. And then there's these Pharisees who seemed, maybe they have followed this man. And Pharisees are everywhere. And they followed this guy. He was healed, and he left their presence, and they've just walked behind him, and they see Jesus come to him, and they hear what Jesus has said. And so they want to know, are we blind too? And Jesus' response is kind of interesting. It's almost like, yeah, you wish. Because if you were blind, and you knew you were blind, then you would see. But you think you see. You're judging, you're viewing everything. You had the chance to respond to the Messiah, and you're responding. You think that you're the mouthpiece of God. You're judging everything by this oral law. Totally blinded you. So you wish that you were blind, but because you think you see, your sin remains. Your guilt remains. And so you see here how the blind receiving their sight, their spiritual sight, and even this man physically. And then those who don't even know they're blind stay there. Now, as we're wrapping this up, I think there's a lot that we can pull from here. And I encourage you this week in your home groups, study this passage out. We just skimmed the surface. Like the tension, the drama, just the different parts, the parallels that you can see in here, they just go on and on and on. And so I encourage you in your home groups, either virtually or whatever, just sit in this passage for a while and just kind of let it rest in your mind and turn things over, because it's just rich. But the first thing that I came away from this, and I get it, this is pretty shallow, but the first thing I came away from this, I thought of Phil. But I thought, Jesus, like we said, he's brilliant. We've used all these adjectives, and you kind of just run out of adjectives. But Phil put it best a few weeks ago when he just said, Jesus is so rad. Right? I mean, what else do we have? I mean, think about this event. I mean, the tension, the drama. If you were to play this out on like a movie, I mean, this is like incredible. Jesus so skillfully handling like the supreme court of Israel, just turning them on their heads. The drama just drips into Jesus always in control, proving himself he's the mouthpiece of God. They should listen to him. These fools who've been just heaping burdens on your back with this oral law that have led you nothing but to spiritual blindness. Don't listen to these fools. They're saying, listen to me. He's proven it by the things he's done, by the things he said. Like, Jesus is so rad. Right? Who else would you want to follow? Who else would you want to follow when you interact and when you see him? And then the last thing, you see how Jesus can be so divisive that you have to choose with Jesus. Like, you can't be in the middle. Like, you can't be just, Jesus is a good fellow. He might be God, we're not sure. But he does things, and he keeps doing things and saying things that push people out of the middle. You have to choose with Jesus. Either he's not from God, either he's not who he says he is, he's a liar, he's a sinner, and should be ignored, or he's God. He's exactly who he says he is. And you should do as this man did, and you should fall down and you should worship him. And so with Jesus, there's no middle ground. To be in the middle ground is the same thing as rejecting him. And so maybe that's you this morning. Who you think, yeah, this is a good guy. Like, I enjoy coming, I enjoy hearing the stories. But he's pushing you. As he did the people here, as he did the Pharisees, he did the religious leaders. You got to choose who he is. Either he's God or he's not. There's no middle ground with Jesus. And so this week, I just encourage you to turn this story over. Like, I didn't do it justice. There's so much more here that you can read and can study out and to ask those questions. What in the world is Jesus doing? So do that this week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we love you for so many things. We love you for the words you spoke, for the actions that you did, for the way that you proved yourself to be the Messiah, the way that you backed it up both in word and deed, and we just fall down and we worship you. That you're the God who knows, you're the God who sees, you're the God who speaks. Lord, we love you and we worship you. We ask that you give us the spiritual sight, give us the ability as we are interacting throughout our lives with people who don't see. Help us to use and to speak your words of life and your words of sight into these people's lives, that they would come to know you. Lord, help us to do that. Help us to do that without fear, without being ashamed. Again, we love you for all these things. In your name, amen.